What's up YouTube? It's your boy Senekill back in the shop, and this is the third video in my How to Get Your Shop Started series. This video specifically is going to be more directed at some of the cutting tools you could get as your shop grows, and a couple of grinding and cleaning tools that may help out around the shop. Let's start off with something that I mentioned in the Bare Essentials video, and that is your angle grinder. I think it needs to be said again, but angle grinders are definitely an awesome thing to have around the shop. Coupled with a cutoff wheel, you can find yourself cutting a lot of things. But there's certain things that it may not do as great as other tools would do as far as cutting. A couple examples might be cutting plate or cutting sheet metal. Maybe you want a nice long or tight curve in a piece of sheet metal. These wouldn't be the best tool to use for something like that. Or possibly you might find yourself cutting some pipe. What I commonly run into if I'm cutting like around 1.5 or 2 inch piece of pipe is my cutoff wheel will bottom out, and then I'll have to rotate the pipe and then make another cut. And sometimes you'll find yourself not lining up your second cut with your first cut perfectly, or maybe you'll have your grinder maybe at a slight angle or something, and your cuts won't line up, so then you end up having to do more cutting and grinding than you initially intended. Something that can be great for cutting pipe and tube and things like that and being able to make it in one swipe would be a chop saw. This is an abrasive chop saw. It uses a 14-inch cutoff wheel, kind of like what you have in a 4.5-inch angle grinder. This one though, it is, like I said, it's 14 inches. You can see how thin it is. There's a couple downfalls to a chop saw though, an abrasive chop saw. They tend to be loud, very messy, and if you put too much pressure as you are, hold on a second, as you are feeding the chop saw down, you'll find that where the blade is so long or wide and so thin, you'll find that if you put too much pressure on the chop saw as you're feeding it, the blade will kind of track away from where it's intended, and you'll end up with an angled cut. It'll flex a little bit. So yeah, that's just something to be aware of, but it's definitely got some great perks. One being it's fairly cheap. This one specifically, it's the DeWalt, as you can see, and it cost me about $200. There's a lot of cheaper alternatives out there. I just got this one just because I was kind of limited on choices. It was between this or a Kawasaki brand, and it kind of looked a little bit flimsy. Not saying it is, but that's just how it looked to me. So I went with the DeWalt, but like I said, there's plenty out there in the cheaper ranges. This one specifically has a nice back plate on the vise. You can adjust it so you can cut 45-degree angles, 30, 15-degree angles. It's great for being able to miter anything. So yeah, it's definitely a great tool to have around the shop, but if you have a little more money to spend, you might want to invest in maybe a cold saw. It does a similar job to this. It's not as messy. It's probably still as loud, but they are quite a bit more expensive, and the replacement blades, although they last a lot longer, they are fairly expensive as well. I believe the blades for those are around the $100 range, somewhere in there. So yeah, if you wanted a slightly better alternative, you could go with that, but they are, again, a little more expensive. Also, you could look at a bandsaw. They do a similar job. A few perks there as well, but if you do get a bandsaw, you might want to get yourself some coolant to keep around the blade. That way you don't get the blade too hot and wear it out prematurely. So yeah, those are a few processes like that. Another thing, if you want to cut a bunch of little holes in, say, a piece of sheet metal, whether you're making gussets or a sweep visor for a rat rod, those always look cool. Or maybe you're making a bumper and you just kind of want that look that a lot of off-road bumpers have. You could use hole saws. You could also use dimple dies with these things, and they make a really awesome effect and also make some sheet metal stronger. But with hole saws, you got to use a drill. Let me just take this off real quick. This right here is the arbor. It screws into the hole saw, and you can see it's got a set screw there as well. Typically whenever you get a set, it will come with the drill bit that goes inside of the hole, and then you just put it in there and lock down the set screw, and then screw the arbor onto the hole saw. Then put this end into the drill, and there you go, you're ready to cut holes. The drill bit in the center is just that way it'll keep the blade straight and it won't go crazy on you. They're very awesome to have. Again, with these you want to use some coolant, that way you don't wear out the blade or the hole saws prematurely. Next up, I think I went over them in the bare essentials, but files. Files are awesome to have around for cleaning up maybe something you just cut with a chop saw or cut off wheel. They're awesome to have around. Deburr edges, round off maybe like some sheet metal you just cut a hole in. You want to round that hole off a little bit, that way nobody gets cut on it. They're awesome to have around, like I said, but something you need to keep in mind when using a metal file. Most metal files are meant to be pushed. Typically, if you see a file that is meant to be pulled, those are draw files, and most of those you find in the woodworking world. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. You got all kinds of different shapes and sizes and things like that, but files are definitely a great thing to have around the shop. Another thing that you can use for cleanup on whether it's welds or maybe cleaning up edges or anything like that, die grinders are awesome to have. They got right angle die grinders as well, and you just kind of hold them like a gun, and it allows you to put more forward pressure on them. But they're great to have. Like I said, maybe you got a tight corner that you can't fit a grinder with a grinding wheel in. You can just slide one of these in. They got all kinds of different bits that go in them. Just to show you a few, this is more of a cylinder shape. You got some cone shapes. These are a little bit bigger. You also have your tiny little abrasive types. You also have file type ends to go on them. This one, I don't know if the video will show it, but it's kind of like one of the files I just showed you. The file blades just run straight down, a little bit of an angle on them, but you got those kind, and then this one right here just has a bunch of little spikes. But this set though, they came from Tractor Supply and they was pretty cheap. I wouldn't advise going the cheap route on those because these ones don't last at all. So that's just a little tip there. Another tool that is really awesome to have around and really fun to use is a plasma cutter. You can do a great deal of things with a plasma cutter. You can cut tube, you can cut sheet metal, you can cut designs in sheet metal. Maybe you want to make a fire pit ring or something like that with some designs cut into it. You can do that with a plasma cutter. You can cut plate with a plasma cutter. They're just really awesome. One thing to keep in mind though, you got to get yourself a air compressor, and you also have to get one obviously with the die grinder, but you got to make sure you get a properly sized air compressor, one that'll push enough air to feed the plasma cutter. But also another thing, you might want to make sure that you have dry air going into the plasma cutter, and to do that you would get yourself an air dryer and filtering system. Those typically are around, the set that I got, I paid about $100 for that set, but you just want to protect your investment as best as possible. The consumables for these things can be quite expensive. This one right here is a Hypertherm PowerMax 30XP. I think I paid around $1,200 to $1,300 for it, but like I said, it is an awesome tool and really fun to use. A few other things that are out there that I don't really have here in the shop. You got, they have circular saw type tools out there that are meant for cutting metal with. You can cut sheet metal with them fairly well. You also have your electric and pneumatic shears. Those are really great for cutting sheet metal, and if you're doing artsy stuff, you can get nice curves with a set of shears. Another thing that's really great to have is reciprocating saws. More commonly people call them Sawzalls, but that's just a brand. But they're really awesome to have around. A good example where you would want to use one of those is maybe you got to do some cutting on a bed on a truck, but you got your gas tank right there is fairly close. You don't want a bunch of sparks flying on it. So a good Sawzall would be a good route to go. You just got to watch with how you apply the pressure and how much pressure you apply when using one of those, because if you apply the pressure at the wrong angle or anything like that, the blade can snag and end up bent, and then you end up buying more blades. So one more tool I'm going to show you. Let's go check that out real quick. This is the other tool I was referring to. It's just a bench grinder. If you ever find yourself needing to maybe clean up the outside edges, round something off, having one of these makes it really easy to do so. One thing I advise though is to never really have a gap that big between your plate right here and the wheel, just because you could get something caught, whatever you're grinding, it could get caught and yank up out of your hands. So you really want your gap to be a little more along the lines of that. Just, you want to keep it kind of close to the wheel, just so nothing gets caught and ends up yanking out of your hands. Bench grinders are pretty cheap to have around. This one cost me about $100. I got it at Tractor Supply. Yeah, like I said, it's just a really great tool to have around. Well folks, I guess that's about it for this video. I hope I was able to help you out in some way. I hope you stick around for the next videos as well. Peace.